Portugal's Golden Visa is the only EU program left where you can eventually apply for citizenship without ever having lived there. But in 2026, the timeline is set to double from 5 years to 10 years. So many people are now searching for alternative investor residency programs in Europe. But although these alternatives can give you permanent residency, they typically only deliver citizenship if you actually relocate and integrate. They're not shortcuts, and it's a completely different outcome. If you don't understand the difference, you could be planning for the wrong thing. In this video, I'm going to walk you through every viable investor residency option that's left in the EU. Not just the investment amounts and the basics, but what you actually get, what's needed for citizenship, and who each option genuinely works for. First up is Italy's investor visa. This has multiple pathways for investment depending on your profile. You can invest €250,000 in an innovative Italian startup, which could appeal to people with a business or tech background who prefer to be actively involved in the business. Or you can do a €500,000 equity investment in an Italian company, which is a lot more hands-off than the startup route. And if you prefer something super straightforward, then there's the option to invest €2 million in Italian government bonds. And finally, there's a €1 million philanthropic donation option, although this is the least common route for obvious reasons. The initial permit is 2 years, and it's renewable for 3-year periods after that, with no minimum stay required to maintain the permit. And processing time is typically 2 to 4 months, which is pretty fast compared to Portugal's current 24 to 30 month or more backlog. And Italy also offers a flat tax regime for new residents called the neo-domicile tax regime. Here you pay a fixed €200,000 per year on all your foreign sourced income, regardless of the amount, whether it's 1 million, 50 million, or more. This replaces Italy's normal progressive tax rates, which go up to 43%. But there's a caveat here. The 2026 budget law, which is literally being finalized this week at the end of December, will increase this to €300,000 from January 26 for new applicants. So existing participants do keep their €200,000 rate. If you're considering actual relocation for business or tax planning, then that timing is definitely worth factoring in. And there's one critical distinction that you need to understand. You can get the Italian residency permit with no minimum stay, but getting citizenship after 10 years requires you to be actually resident in Italy, not just holding the permit from afar. You'll also need to acquire Italian language proficiency at B1 level, and that means you need to be able to hold a basic conversation and handle everyday situations. You also need substantial physical presence throughout the entirety of those 10 years. So if your goal is just to get European residency and mobility, then Italy works well. But if your end goal is EU citizenship via Italy, then you do need to be willing to actually relocate there. And those are two completely different strategies. You need to be clear about which one you're pursuing before you make any investment. Italy is an attractive option for business-minded investors who might want to build something there, or for people who are open to relocating to Europe and value the Mediterranean lifestyle. But it's not comparable to Portugal in terms of citizenship efficiency, because you do need to actually live in Italy to naturalize, and that's the trade-off you're making. But if you're looking for the lowest property investment threshold in the EU with no minimum stay requirement, then there's another program that might surprise you. Our next program of interest is Greece, where the Golden Visa investment program has changed significantly over the past couple of years. And as of now, December 2025, the program's still active, but the minimum investment thresholds did increase in 23 and 24. So the real estate investment now works on a tiered model. You're looking at €800,000 in high demand zones, which includes Athens, Thessaloniki, and Santorini. And these are the areas that most people actually want to buy in. In all other regions, it's €400,000, and there's also a €250,000 option, but that's only for specific conversion or renovation projects. And this is a pretty narrow scope. So you can't just buy any property at that price point anymore, like it used to be. In return, you get a 5-year permit that's renewable, and there's zero minimum stay needed to maintain it. You get full Schengen access from day one, and the processing time is typically 6 to 12 months. So Greece is a pretty good option for permanent residency and EU mobility. You can own European real estate. You'll get freedom to travel across the Schengen zone, and you can choose to relocate later on if you want to. And just like Italy, you can get the residency permit with no minimum stay. But getting Greek citizenship after 7 years, or applying for Greek citizenship after 7 years, I should say, requires you to actually be resident in Greece, not just holding the permit. You'll also need to be proficient in Greek language at B1 level. And I'm talking about being able to pass a formal language test, which is no joke in Greek. And you also need the substantial physical presence and tax paying throughout those 7 years. So if your goal is European residency, real estate ownership, and Schengen travel mobility, then Greece could be a good option for you. But again, if your end goal is citizenship, then you do need to be ready to actually relocate there and learn Greek. If you're able to get the permit at 250,000 euros, then it is good value. But if you want a 10-year residency permit from day one, instead of renewable 5-year permits, then there's another interesting option in Europe that's worth taking a look at. In 2024, Hungary launched its new guest investor residence permit to replace the old residency bond program. This has two investment routes. Firstly, you can put 250,000 euros into approved real estate investment funds, and this is the pathway that most people use. Or secondly, you can make a 1 million euro donation to public interest entities, but that's a much higher threshold and obviously a lot less common. In return, you get a 10-year residency permit with no minimum stay requirement, and you can renew it once. So you end up with 20 years of total coverage, which is a pretty decent length of time. And processing time for that permit is typically 4 to 6 months. And just to be super clear here, there's no direct real estate purchase route in Hungary. It was proposed originally, but they scrapped it before implementation. So this is investing in real estate funds only. Hungary also offers favorable tax treatment. It's currently 9% corporate income tax and a flat 15% personal income tax. So if you want to relocate for business reasons, then the tax environment could be genuinely of interest. And I also need to address something that could matter for your decision here. Now, Hungary's political climate under the Orbán government leans heavily conservative and nationalist. And if you're a part of my audience who left the UK because of Brexit, or if you're from the US and you're concerned about the direction of politics over there, then Hungary is likely moving in the opposite direction from what you're looking for. I've seen people attracted to Hungary specifically because of its traditional values stance. And if that's not your worldview, then this probably is not your program. Conservative and nationalist societies are typically not the best landing points for immigrants. And it's all very well investing for residency, but if you actually want to go for citizenship in the future, then you might find that integration is an uphill battle in an environment that's already skeptical of outsiders. Sure, you can get the residency permit with no minimum stay, but citizenship after 8 years will need actual residency in Hungary, not just holding the permit. And there's another challenge here. You're also going to need Hungarian language at B2 level, which is really high and it's a difficult language. Proof of genuine integration into society and substantial physical presence requirements throughout those 8 years. So that's not a trivial consideration at all, especially given that political climate I've just described. If your goal is long-term European residency with strong tax benefits and you're not concerned about the political climate, then Hungary offers good value. But if your end goal is citizenship, then keep in mind these caveats that you do need to be willing to relocate there, become very competent in Hungarian, and integrate into a society with a very specific political direction. But if you want the absolute lowest entry point in the EU for an investor visa, starting at just 50,000 euros, there's one program out there that beats everything on price. Latvia has the lowest entry point in the EU for investor residency. You can invest just 50,000 euros in a Latvian company, or you can choose to do 250,000 euros in real estate. And there's also 280,000 in a bank deposit or 250,000 again in government bonds. You can get renewable temporary residency with no minimum stay needed to maintain the permit. And processing time is super fast, typically just 1 to 3 months. But now let's look at the citizenship process. So this requires 10 years of residency and Latvian language proficiency at the A2 to B1 level. Latvia does allow dual citizenship for naturalized citizens, but only if you come from specific countries. That's NATO countries, so that does include the UK and the US, EU member states, EFTA member states, Australia, New Zealand, and Brazil. And since the UK and the US are both NATO members, then you can naturalize in Latvia and keep your original citizenship. But let's face it, 10 years is a long timeline, and the Latvian language requirement is real and significant. It's not a widely spoken language, and there aren't many resources for learning it compared to Spanish, Greek, or Italian. And honestly speaking, if you're willing to spend 10 years working towards citizenship, you'd likely be better off living in a country where you actually want to stay long term. So this means that Latvia is primarily a residency product for most people, not a realistic citizenship pathway. So what does residency actually get you? Well, you get the lowest cost EU residency permit available. You get access to the Schengen zone for travel mobility purposes. And there's no minimum stay requirement, so you can maintain the status without having to live there. But the value proposition in Latvia is quite weak compared to other options, apart from being very affordable. The country has limited lifestyle appeal compared to Southern Europe. It's significantly colder and darker for much of the year. So the real benefit here is price driven. It's the cheapest entry point for EU residency, and it does give you options for the future. But there's one more program with a unique tax benefit, which you can become a tax resident there with just 60 days spent in the country per year. Let's take a look at that one next. Now, the Cyprus Permanent Residency Program offers something quite structurally different from the other programs we've looked at so far. This is immediate permanent residency rather than just temporary renewable permits. And don't mix this program up with Cyprus's old citizenship by investment program that was cancelled a few years ago. This is just for residency. You invest €300,000 in new residential property purchased from a developer, or €300,000 in commercial real estate, company shares, or Cypriot investment funds. You also need proof of €50,000 or more of annual foreign income from outside of Cyprus. And in return, you get permanent residency immediately. You own the status outright, and you just need to visit once every 2 years to maintain it. And processing time is fairly quick, typically 6 to 8 months, although that's not the fastest out of all the ones we've talked about. There's one important limitation that you need to understand about mobility in Cyprus. The country is not in the Schengen zone yet. Accession is expected, but as of December 2025, it still hasn't happened. So if you're a UK or a US citizen, this doesn't affect your travel because you already have visa-free access to Schengen with your original passport. And that's the same for other nationalities like Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, and so on. But for nationals from other countries that do require Schengen visas, then the benefit of Cyprus permanent residency is that you can apply for this through a simplified procedure, and you can typically receive a multiple entry visa that's valid for up to 5 years. The more critical limitation to consider is that this permanent residency only gives you the right to live in Cyprus. It doesn't give you the rights to live and work across the EU. As we know, that only comes with EU citizenship. So what does it look like to get citizenship in Cyprus? Well, it follows the standard naturalization path, where you need to spend at least 7 years of actual physical residence in Cyprus, along with Greek language proficiency and integration. So you can use your investor permanent residency to fulfill this requirement if you choose to relocate. But once you naturalize as a Cypriot citizen, then you will get full EU citizenship rights. That's the freedom to live, work, study, and retire across any EU or EEA country plus Switzerland. And Cyprus also allows dual citizenship with both the UK and the US and a whole bunch of other countries too. So it does work quite well for specific profiles. So Cyprus has favorable tax treatment for individuals and businesses. And it's quite attractive for people with international income structures because it offers a rare 60-day tax residency route alongside the standard 183-day one, which gives flexibility to internationally mobile investors. So if your goal is permanent EU residency with interesting tax benefits and immediate permanent residency status, then Cyprus can offer you that. But again, if your goal is citizenship, then you do need to be willing to actually relocate to Cyprus and commit to at least 7 years there. Now, there's one final program that solves a problem that none of the others address. And it's the only EU Golden Visa option where English is an official language. Let's take a look at that one next. So here we've got Malta's Permanent Residence Program, known as the MPRP. This is a unique offering because English is an official language in Malta, which is going to be really useful for a lot of people. And this program offers immediate permanent residency, like Cyprus does, not just renewable temporary permits. So here's what the structure looks like. You pay €37,000 as a government contribution, €60,000 in admin fees covering the main applicant plus the spouse and the minor children, and donate €2,000 to a Maltese charity. If you have adult dependents over 18, then you need to add €7,500 each. And for property, you either purchase at €375,000 minimum or rent at €12,000 to €14,000 per year, and you need to maintain that for 5 years. On top of that, you also need to demonstrate €500,000 in assets, with 150,000 of that liquid, or 650,000 euros in assets with 75,000 liquid. Malta grants lifetime permanent residence from day one, and the residency card does renew every 5 years. That's an administrative issue, but your status itself does not expire, and there's no minimum stay requirement. Processing timeline is fairly long, it's 6 to 8 months, but you can get a temporary permit within 4 weeks, while the main application is being processed. And after 7 years of continuous residence, you do become eligible to apply for citizenship of Malta. So Malta is not competing on price at all here. It's a lot more expensive than Latvia or some of the Greece options, but it is the only EU Golden Visa where English is an official language, and it's one of two, including Cyprus, where you get immediate permanent residency rather than temporary permits. So if English language matters to you and you want immediate permanent residency, then Malta could be worth the premium. So I promised you a reality check, and here it is. Do you notice the pattern among all these options? Golden Visa investment can get you European residency, Schengen access in most cases, and the right to live in that specific country. But if you actually want EU citizenship through one of these countries, then you need a completely different package, including relocation, integration, language proficiency in most cases, and years of actual physical presence. So when Portugal's Golden Visa was launched in 2012, it was part of a small group that were offering something very unusual: EU citizenship without genuine relocation. That was minimal presence and no real integration required. But gradually, Malta and Cyprus shut down their citizenship by investment programs because of EU pressure, and Portugal is currently the last one standing. And now the timeline there looks set to double from 5 to 10 years. That's currently going through Parliament, but it is pretty sure that that's going to change sometime in 2026. So what remains are a bunch of legitimate residency products. So these do deliver real benefits if you want the option to live in Europe, a base for EU business, access to European education for your children, or the freedom to relocate later if your circumstances at home change. But if you want to get the passport, then in almost every case, that means actually moving there. Investment can buy you residency rights, but integration is the only thing that earns you citizenship. And all of these programs require years of actual residence, language proficiency, and real integration before you can naturalize. And many people overlook that investor residency programs aren't necessarily the fastest pathway to citizenship anymore. In fact, there are countries like Belgium, France, or Germany, plus a few others, that offer the opportunity to apply for citizenship in 5 years or less to anyone who's prepared to move there, work there, and integrate properly, with no investment required. And check out this video where I cover some of those options in more detail. So the question here is not really which Golden Visa program is the best alternative to Portugal, but the question is, what are you actually trying to achieve? If you want permanent residency in Europe, then these programs do deliver. But if your end goal is EU citizenship, then you do need to decide whether you're willing to actually relocate and integrate properly. And if you are, you might not even need to look at investor residency at all. But if you're not, then you do need to understand that the programs offering a pathway to citizenship without relocation in Europe have shrunk to just Portugal, and Portugal's advantage is rapidly disappearing as well. I've put together a detailed comparison chart of all these programs with the investment amounts, processing time, citizenship requirements, language levels, and so on. So everything you need to compare your options at a glance, and you can grab that from the link in the description. And if you want timely updates on changes to these programs and others like new ones being launched and so on, then join the Digital Emigre newsletter, and the link to that is also in the description. So my advice is make your decisions based on what these programs actually deliver, not what used to be possible. Thanks so much for watching Digital Emigre, and I'll see you in the next video.